Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and today we're going to be walking through the first of 4 courses on triggers. By the end of this course, you should be able to use triggers to start your bot whenever a hotkey is pressed. We'll also learn about how to continuously run a bot on our machine, with it only taking actions when we use certain hotkeys. But before we get started, let's learn a little bit about what triggers are and how they work. In A360, a trigger is sort of like an if command and a loop command combined, because the bot will loop continuously while checking if a condition has been met. Once the condition's been met, then it'll break out of the loop and perform some action. The simplest way to think of this is by thinking about how the bot starts. Up until this point, whenever we wanted to run a bot, we've clicked the Run button and the bot executed. But with triggers, we can instead tell the bot to wait for a specific event to take place before it executes. You'll see when we get our hands on with it, but basically the bot will be waiting in the background for us to press certain hotkeys before it starts running. I'll also show you how to incorporate triggers into the actual code of the bot, so that it'll wait for certain events to occur while the bot's running. The difference between standard triggers and these trigger loops is subtle, but it'll allow us to continuously run a bot and perform different actions depending on how we interact with it. But that's enough talk. Let's dive in and get started with triggers. For this course, let's pretend we work at the front desk of the emergency room at a hospital. We have several responsibilities, but one of our most important job duties is gathering information about patients when they arrive. When a patient checks in at the ER, we need to gather their first and last name, a list of their symptoms, and the name of their insurance provider. We then need to log all of this information to a CSV file named after the patient's last name, so that doctors can access it when needed. The main issue here is that we don't want to have to go to A360 and click Run when a patient arrives because time is a factor. Instead, we'd like to press a certain combination of keys to quickly start the bot when a patient comes in. For that, we'll be using a trigger to start our bot. Let's start by logging into the control room and navigating to the automation section like we've been doing. Then, navigate to the Citizen Developer folder and create a new subfolder called Triggers 101. Let's create a new bot within that folder. Since we're dealing with patient intake procedures, let's call this bot CD22-patient intake. Before we deal with triggers, let's build out this bot. Overall, it's fairly simple. Collect the patient information and log it to a CSV. Let's start by using the prompt package to gather that patient info. We'll head over to the Actions sidebar and search for the prompt package, then drag a for-value command into the main workspace. For the prompt window caption, we'll put patient intake. Then, for the prompt message, let's put, what is the patient's first name? We need to assign the output to a variable as well, so next to that dropdown, let's click the Create Variable icon. We'll name this variable First Name so that it's clear what the variable's for. Then, click Create and select. Now we need the patient's last name. To make this a lot easier on ourselves, let's first click anywhere else on the screen to save our first prompt for value command, then copy that prompt for value command on line 1 and paste it just below on line 2. We can leave the prompt window caption alone, but for the message, let's change it so that it asks, what is the patient's last name? Then we can click the Create Variable icon again. Name the new variable Last Name, and then click Create and select. Now we need the patient's symptoms. Our first command should already be copied, so let's paste it again after line 2. Again, we'll leave the window caption alone and change the prompt message to "What are the patient's symptoms?" Once we have that, we'll click the Create Variable icon again and name this variable Symptoms before clicking Create and Select. The last piece of information we need is the name of the patient's insurance provider. We can paste our prompt command one more time after line 3, then change the prompt message to "What is the name of the patient's insurance provider?" Then we'll click the Create Variable icon one last time, name the variable Insurance Provider, and press Create and Select. Now we have all the information we need in 4 variables, so let's log them to a CSV named after the patient's last name. For that, we'll need a log to file command, so let's head to the Actions sidebar and look for the log to file package. Then, drag the log to file command out underneath our last prompt for value command. For the file path, we'll need to create a folder for these files to stay in, so let's click Browse. Navigate to the desktop, and then create a new folder. Let's name this one CD22-Patient Intake. Then, double-click on the folder so that we're inside of it. Click just to the right of the name in the address bar near the top. This will highlight the full path to this folder, and we can use Ctrl-C to copy it. Then, close the Select File window and paste that path into the File Path field. Add a backslash at the end of that folder path. Then press F2 so that we can find the last name variable in the available options and add it. Finally, we can add .csv to the end so that we know we're logging to a CSV file. For the text to log field, let's start with some headers. We'll type first name, comma, last name, comma, symptoms, comma, insurance provider. Then we can go ahead and set this command to overwrite existing log files, so that if we see the same patient again, it'll overwrite their last file. Now let's copy this command and paste it just below on line 6. We can delete everything in the text to log field, and then press F2 to insert the first name variable. Let's add a comma and then press F2 again, and this time we'll insert the last name variable. Add another comma, press F2, then add the symptoms variable. Then finally add one last comma, press F2 one more time, and add the insurance provider variable. We also need to make sure that this log to file command is set to append rather than overwrite, so that it adds this information just below the headers without overwriting the file. So now our bot is built, but we need to set this bot up to run when we press certain hotkeys. That means we'll need to try out our brand new triggers, which can be found over in the Actions sidebar. If we look at the bottom of the sidebar, you'll see a section for triggers with the word Show just to the right. Click on that and it'll expand the Triggers section. This section works almost identically to the Actions section in that there are several categories of triggers with the actual trigger command stored inside. Let's expand the hotkey trigger. Then drag it over to the main workspace. You might notice that if we try to put it in the code itself, there's a symbol indicating that we aren't allowed to do this. That's because these types of triggers have their own section up above the code. We can see a section labeled Triggers with instructions to drag a trigger here. That sounds like just what we're looking for, so put that hotkey trigger into that area. Just like any other action, the options appear on the right sidebar. This one's fairly simple. We just need to select one or more modifiers here, then select the key it'll be paired with. This is just like using Control-C to copy some text, so let's select CTRL as our modifier to keep it simple. Then we can expand the drop-down and choose a letter or other key that we want to use. In this case, since we'll be pressing these keys when we want to run the bot, let's choose R for Run. We'll see our selection appear in the gray box above the modifiers, and everything looks good, so let's try it out. This time though, when we click Run, we'll have two options: Run Now or Run with Triggers. Run Now is what we've been using up until this point, but we want this to run when we press our Control-R hotkey, so let's select Run with Triggers. At first, it'll look like just any other bot run, but once it's ready, the pop-up will show that it's listening for triggers. This means that our bot is ready and waiting. Now we can pretend we're off doing something else for our job, so let's minimize Chrome. While we're working on something else, a patient arrives in the ER, so we need to run our bot. We can leave Chrome minimized, and all we need to do is press Control-R, so let's do that now. After a second, we'll see the bot running window pop up in the bottom right of the screen. Then, the patient intake prompt will appear at the top left of the screen, asking for the patient's first name. Let's put Luke for the first name, and then press OK. For the last name, we'll put Skywalker and press OK. This patient came in missing his right hand, so for the symptoms, we'll put severed right hand and press OK. Finally, it'll ask us the name of his insurance provider, so let's type Alliance Healthcare and press OK. The bot will then finish up on its own and end, so let's take a look at what it produced. Let's open up File Explorer and navigate to the desktop. Then, open our CD22 folder. Inside, there should be a CSV called Skywalker. Let's open that file and see the information inside. We can see our 4 headers at the top, and below each one is the data that we put in. So it looks like our bot was successful. Let's go ahead and close this file. Looks like our bot could be better though. After we entered the patient's information, the bot ended, and to start it again, we'd have to press Control-R. It would be a lot better if we had a way to keep this bot running and available all day. So instead, let's close this bot and make another better version of it that has more functionality. But before we start adding new functionality, let's focus on making sure that the bot won't end after we finish the patient intake process. To do this, we'll need to create a loop that doesn't end unless we tell it to, and for that, we'll use a new command called a trigger loop. Let's go back to the Actions sidebar and search for the trigger loop package, then open it up. Inside, we'll see 3 separate options, but for now, let's drag a trigger loop command into the main workspace area on line 1, just before our first prompt command. You'll notice that this actually adds 2 commands, the trigger loop and the handle command. There are actually no options for the trigger loop command, as you can see in the right sidebar, and that's because the trigger loop will simply wait for one of our handle commands to take place. Let's click on that handle command on line 2 to see what options we have there. For now, there's only the trigger on dropdown, so let's open that up. In the drop-down menu, we'll see all of the same options that we had in the triggers section in the left sidebar. Since we only know how to use hotkeys right now, let's select hotkey trigger. This is set up exactly like the hotkey trigger that we're using to start our bot, so let's define a new hotkey for the patient intake process. Since we want to run this code when a patient comes into the hospital, let's use Control-I as our hotkey. Select Control from the modifier bar, then select I from the dropdown. To finish this up, let's drag all 6 lines of our code inside of the handle command. Now, anytime we press Control-I, our patient intake process will run. But what about if we want the bot to end? For that, we'll need another handle command, so let's go back to the Actions sidebar and grab one. We'll drag this command inside of the trigger loop, but before our previous handle command on line 2. We'll again select Hotkey Trigger from the dropdown, but we'll need a new hotkey that we'll use when we want to quit running the bot. Let's keep with our current convention and use Control-Q for quit. So you select Control from the modifier bar and then Q from the drop-down menu. Now we need to get the bot to end if Control-Q is pressed. So let's head back to the Actions sidebar and grab the break command from the trigger loop package. The break command is used inside of a loop to break out of the loop. So let's drag that inside of our Control-Q handle command that's now on line 2. Now, when we press Control-Q, the bot will know to exit our trigger loop. And since there's nothing outside of that trigger loop, the bot will end, just like we want it to. Now, we have a total of 3 trigger conditions. Control-R to start the bot, Control-Q to quit the bot, and Control-I to perform the patient intake procedure. Let's test it out by clicking Run at the top and then selecting Run with Triggers. We'll wait for the bot to load up, and after a bit, we should see that it's listening for triggers, like before. Let's minimize Chrome to pretend like we're working on something else. And then, when you're ready, press Control-R to start the bot. After a second, the bot running window will appear in the bottom right, like before. But it'll kind of just sit there and not move any further. Let's say that a new patient just came in, and we need to perform the patient intake procedure. We know that we can press Control-I for that, so let's do that now. The prompts should appear pretty much immediately, just like we want them to. So let's go ahead and put Darth for the first name. Then put Vader for the last name. Let's put third-degree burns for the symptoms. For the insurance provider, we'll put Imperial Wellness. After we press OK, the bot running window should still be present in the bottom right, meaning it's waiting for another trigger. Let's say another patient just came into the hospital, so let's press Control-I again. This time, let's put Han for the first name, Solo for the last name, and hypothermia for the symptoms. For insurance provider, we'll put Alliance Healthcare again. Again, after we press OK, the bot's still running. But now, let's say the day is over and we want to end the bot. We'll press Control-Q so that the bot running window disappears, because the bot has ended. We can confirm this by heading back to Chrome, where we should see that it's now listening for triggers again. Let's go ahead and press Stop and go ahead and check our bot's output.
Open up File Explorer again, navigate back to the desktop, and open the CD22 folder. Inside, there should be 3 files: Skywalker, Solo, and Vader. Inside of each one should be our 4 headers, and underneath should be the data that we entered for each one. Great job! And that's it. Now you know the basic details of triggers, how to use hotkeys to trigger the start and end of a bot, as well as how to execute different branches of code. This simple bot you just built is able to run for as long as you like and perform multiple conditions based just on the hotkey triggers that you perform. This opens up a lot of possibilities for having multiple options within a single bot, and that's an extremely powerful tool.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. For more RPA training, check out the next video here, or watch everything in order right here. Subscribe to my channel for updates on new content, and become a patron to get access to personalized RPA support. But until next time, I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and I hope this helps you build better bots.